What's up guys, Luke Pelly here, back with another video. Do you own a camera? Do you not know how to use it? I was the same way until about a year ago when I took a semester-long photography class while in college. And while I think it was a good class, I realistically think I could condense everything I learned in that class into 5 minutes of photography. All right, and the clock starts, oh, missed it. It's gotta go around again. We'll do it at the 30. And the clock starts now. First, what is a photo? All a photo is light. How light is captured on a photosensitive surface, something like that. So to get a good photo, or to get really any photo at all we have to do is manipulate light. So there's 3 ways to do that, and that's called your exposure triangle. So the 3 things that make that up are gonna be your aperture, your shutter speed, and your ISO. First, your aperture. All your aperture is how wide open your lens is. So the wider the aperture, the more light is being let into your lens. The more closed down the aperture, the smaller the hole going into the lens, and the less light you're letting in. So this part's a little confusing, but the lower that f-stop number, so f-stop and aperture are the exact same thing. The lower that number, the more wide open the aperture. So lower the number, more wide open, and the bigger the number, the more closed down your aperture. So an f-stop of 1.8 is gonna be really open. The whole lens is gonna be open, letting in light. And an f-stop of 28 is going to be really closed down, and it's going to be a very little amount of light being let in. So your aperture is also going to affect your depth of field. Best way I can do this is to show this diagram. So the smaller the number, the smaller the depth of field. So this small area is going to be in focus versus when your aperture is a really high number, like 28, the whole field is going to be in focus. So using these in photography, if you're doing portraits, you want a low aperture so you get a nice blurry background and nice depth of field. But if you're doing landscapes, you want the whole rolling hills in focus, you want your foreground, your background, everything in focus. So for that, you're gonna do a really high number, so like f28 or f18. All a phone does in portrait mode is it digitally blurs the background, and that's why those photos look so good on your phone, is because it's faking depth of field. But you just learned how to do that for real, so now you can do that on your camera. The next thing that adjusts light is your shutter speed. All the shutter speed is the length of time that your shutter stays open. So really fast shutter speed, it's open and it closes. Versus if you're doing a shutter speed of like 30 seconds, it's gonna stay open for that whole amount of time, and again, let in more light in that long period of time. Another thing shutter speed affects is the motion of the photography. So if you're doing sports photography and someone's running around, you want a really fast shutter speed so we can quickly get them and capture them and freeze them in motion. Versus if you're trying to capture a night sky and you want the stars to appear on the camera, you're gonna go more towards a slower shutter speed, like 30 seconds, so it can stay open and capture more light into the camera. But there's another thing to consider, and that's your hand moving around. So anything below 1/60, so 1/60th of a second, you're gonna wanna stick your camera on a tripod, because even if you're trying to stay still, your hand's gonna introduce micro jitters into the shot and the whole thing's gonna look blurry. So stick it on a tripod if you're below 1/60. And then the last piece of your exposure triangle is your ISO. That's just how sensitive your camera is to light. Another way to think of that is just like digitally boosting the light of a photo. Did you ever get a photo back onto your computer and it looks really dark, so you just kind of boost the light on the computer, but then it starts looking really grainy? That's the same thing that ISO does. The higher the ISO number, the more grain is going to be in your shot. So you want to keep that number as low as possible for as long as you can. If it's nighttime, you have to compromise and you're going to have to boost your ISO just to get a usable image. But daytime, anything like that, we want our number as low as possible. So like ISO 100. So which one do we adjust first? For what reason? You're going to pick between your shutter speed and aperture depending on the scenario. So if you're doing sports photography, it's always going to be shutter speed that you adjust first. Same thing with star photography. So anything where shutter is your priority and the length of time the shutter stays open, if that's your priority, adjust that first and then adjust aperture accordingly. But if you're doing portrait photography, you're more concerned with depth of field and aperture than you are with shutter. So shutter speed is going to be adjusted after your aperture. And again, ISO is the last thing we're going to adjust, because all that is just how sensitive your camera is to light. But we can adjust those in our shutter speed and aperture before we have to start introducing noise into our image. Noise and grain are the same thing. Now finally, the last major thing we learned in photography class is just composition. So after we have our photos correctly exposed, and we have our depth of field, we have our shutter speed correct, all the technical stuff, now how do we make our photos look good, look cool, look professional? And that's where composition comes in. So a few things I want to say about that: use negative space. Don't be afraid if you're just shooting like a tree to just leave a lot of the sky open, or keep the subject small with a lot of headroom. That can look cool, especially if there's mountains or something behind them, so you're not kind of just taking over the frame with a person's face. Next, if you're sticking the subject in the center of the frame, a good thing to do is to use symmetry. So if they're in the center of the frame, I like to frame them with like a doorway or an archway. Another place you could put your subject is the rule of thirds. So draw 2 lines down the center of your photo and stick them on one of those lines. So split their face with the lines, and that's your rule of thirds. Another cool thing to do is to stick your subject in like the dead center of a road and have the road lines leading towards them and the power lines leading towards them. That's something you don't really pick up on, but your eye follows those lines towards your subject. And time's up. We did it. We explained everything I learned in my photography class in that small amount of time. So nice. I just saved you $5,000 on that tuition. And then the other like 2 things we learned are just how to use Adobe Lightroom and then how to print our photos. But neither of those things have to do with how good your photo looks. So no amount of editing or printing your photo larger is going to save a bad photo. With these things that I learned in that class and these things that I just shared with you, I feel confident that I could literally pick up any camera. You could hand me your camera with your funky settings and whatever. As long as I can figure out how to correctly expose an image, get good depth of field, and then composition, I'm going to get a good photo regardless of what camera I'm using, what brand of camera I'm using. It doesn't matter, it's Canon, Nikon, Sony. You're going to get a good photo using these tips. Now guys, this video is sponsored by no one. No one's sponsoring this video. But you can sponsor this video for the low price of hitting that subscribe button. And guess what? It's completely free and it helps me continue making videos. Not because it gives me any money, it just makes me feel better about doing this and spending all this time putting out this content for nothing. So sponsor this video for the low price of hitting that subscribe button. It's completely free. It helps support the channel. And you can always unsubscribe if you hate the content or you want to leave later. Maybe you realize you have made too many subscriptions and too many commitments in your life and you're just like, oh, I need to unsubscribe to this guy because he takes too much time away from all my work because I can't stop watching him. Then if that happens, you can unsubscribe. But for now, subscribe, stay a while. We'll have some fun, have some laughs, have some food. I'm hungry. I just skipped dinner to film this, so I'm gonna go eat. Yeah, I'm gonna go eat. It's like 1 a.m., so I'm gonna eat. All right, guys, goodbye. I love you.